A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again. And well, you might recall when in Films I'm Willing to Talk About Again Season 1, where I actually talked a lot about King Kong 2005, which was, of course, made by Lord of the Rings man himself, Peter Jackson. But why don't we go ahead and take several steps back in the King Kong franchise? Because in 1976, especially following the re-ignition of King Kong within the giant monster movie genre, especially with the success of King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962, the animated series by Rankin Bass of the 60s as well, plus King Kong Escapes, Dino De Laurentiis, as well as the film company that he created, alongside Paramount, decided to go in and create their own remake of King Kong. And well, King Kong 1976 was born. So, what we got here is essentially a remake. Yeah, nothing more to it. But to be fair, it actually does a pretty good job at simply recreating the film from the ground up, utilizing some of the same exact techniques that we had gotten over the years, including giant models, basically scale-sized parts, including the hands, feet, and head of King Kong himself, much like in the original from 1933, as well as the usage of suits, which of course were made possible by legendary filmmaking effects creator Rick Baker. Yeah, makeup artist Rick Baker is in this film. And this of course was a while before the likes of other films like An American Werewolf in London and Harry and the Hendersons. But the thing is that this was one of the earlier steps in Baker's career as a makeup artist in films. And this definitely was able to really shine what he was capable of doing at the time, long before more famous hits like what I've already mentioned had come around. And then of course, we can't forget about the cast itself. De Laurentiis was able to rack in some pretty good actors, and Paramount themselves certainly didn't disappoint either. You had the likes of Jessica Lange, and even with good old Jeff Bridges on board. And not to mention with several others that have also come around. But I wouldn't really go so far to say that with the original, their cast certainly was nothing worth talking bad about. But here in the remake, I'd say, while they don't necessarily amount to that much in comparison, they still do some incredible roles here. Of course, with this being a remake, or reimagining as some might suggest, it's certainly in no way a clone of the original. In fact, it actually takes place more in modern times, basically 1970s New York, as well as on an island, much like what we had in the original. Except this was more recent as opposed to it being in the 30s like the original, which that time itself was deemed recent rather than taking place at some point in the past. In any case though, the main premise of course is also a really big change. Instead of a greedy film director who wishes to search for some sort of legend on an island of some sorts and bring along a person that he wants to become an actress with him, you have an executive from an oil company. Yeah. Basically, Petrol Oil Company itself is apparently looking to drive up stock prices as well as increase their popularity by business standards by apparently bringing home a giant gorilla that they suspect is on an island somewhere pretty far from New York. And in any case though, the crew, which does of course consist of Dwan, whom is of course the new Ann Darrow, again played by Jessica Lange, and then you have the executive himself. But little did they suspect that there apparently was a stowaway, a primate expert whom mostly is paleontology related, but he of course wishes to see King Kong because apparently only he knows that he exists. And Jeff Bridges in this case, while he isn't necessarily that much better in comparison to the Jack Driscoll character, of course they do share the first name, but it still doesn't necessarily amount to very much here. And much like the original, the professional actor and primate expert much like what we had in the original, actually do become good love interests, especially on the way to the island. And once they make their way there, the premise seems to follow through very similar to the original. But of course, with the main fight being King Kong versus a giant T-Rex, in which that he rips the jaw wide open in the original, here in this film, he actually fights a giant snake. Yep. And on top of that, the Rick Baker suit they created was phenomenal. On top of that, Baker himself was actually wearing it. So this really gives us a good way to shine his capabilities. Not just with the makeup itself, but also the acting that he was able to accompany alongside it. It's basically like if you created something and then you basically wear it. I can't imagine something like that ever happening in life. But in any case though, Baker's phenomenal in this film. Just unbelievable. Probably not as legendary and incredibly ecstatic as the original with their effects that they were able to pull off in 1933, but for 1976 they sure did manage to capitalize on the giant monster movie genre for American audiences in a whole new way with another King Kong film many years later. And on top of that, with Godzilla being quite popular by this time and also having officially put through retirement for the Showa era a year before in 1975, it does make sense that America still wants to continue this sort of genre by all occasion. Anyways though, the fight with the giant snake does of course end with him ripping it apart, which is incredibly impressive, I will say. But it still is a pretty disturbing thing, you know, because the effects certainly felt way too real back there. Of course, Dwan is basically fond of Kong upon realizing that he actually rescued her. And wouldn't you know, compared to Anduro, she actually is a little more on the feisty side. And I'm not kidding when I say that she actually had the guts to punch Kong in the nose. Oh my gosh. Like, when I saw that not too long ago, when I last saw the film, I still can't believe that she actually went through that effort to just somehow think punching him in the nose is gonna do anything for her. Oh, but you know what? I could probably find things way better than that. Like, imagine the next Transformers film when a Decepticon grabs a hold of a certain character and that character actually slices his head off, you know? That would be more amazing if I ever saw anything like that. I would so get up and start cheering in the theater. You know, like I'd freak out in a good way. But anyways though, and time passes, the same old stuff seems to kick into place, but eventually, as we know, much like the original, Kong gets captured, gets stowed back down in the cargo bay down below because apparently the ship that they got was apparently big enough to hold a giant-sized ape. Yeah, how convenient. You know, and just when you think that it was all about fishing for some new oil and also to make their business a lot better, they actually start to use Kong as a certain mascot. Yeah, they actually reveal him inside of a giant gas pump. He's strapped inside of a cage, wearing a crown, and when the executive basically proposes to the public that Kong is going to be a newfound success for the company, just when you think it's going to get very real, oh boy, not only does Kong break out, but oh man, probably the best known part of the effects here is that there was actually a 40-foot tall animatronic ape. That thing was unbelievable. It weighed an unbelievable amount of tonnage, with the fur itself coming in at a nice little fraction to it. You know, that really is just a good showing of what the effects were truly like back then. Oh, but you know what though? Probably the most depressing part of the film though, much like what we saw in the original, as well as the Peter Jackson remake in 2005, was of course the ending. Paramount did not only create some impressive effects based on the fight with the snake, based on Rick Baker's performance and his skills when creating the Kong costume. The thing is, with the animatronic stuff, it does a pretty good job on its own just as well. The fact that it's a mixture of both really goes to show they did try and experiment with a number of things, but only so many of them succeeded. But then, of course, when the ending comes around, unlike planes from the original, this time it's helicopters, fully equipped with miniguns. Yeah, miniguns are just blitzing bullets at Kong as he's standing on top of the Twin Towers. It's insane. All the shots they fire at him have him squirting blood, and he's basically covered in red, which is another piece of disturbing mind when you think about it. Ripping the snake apart and having Kong get punched in the face really showed how real we can possibly get with films like this. But in this context, I imply specifically that the ending of the film becomes a real piece of disturbance in life. And it really goes to show that for 1976, they truly did not hold back on any potential that they could have possibly executed here. Of course, Kong does fall from the buildings to his death, just like the original. And a majority of other Kong-related stuff. So, that, my friends, is the King Kong remake. A giant suit / animatronic tearing through large sets certainly was an impressive feat of filmmaking, at the time at least. It was all great and stuff with suits, animatronics, large scale sets of cities, trains, cars, and whatnot. But really, I'm more about the simple life. Simpler times when so many things might seem wrong, but in the end, a lot of things have truly been figured out. How to make movies much more cheaper, yet much more amazingly. You know, you can make the best effects nowadays at like a fraction of the cost. And then on top of all that, they've managed to simplify and create a lot of newfound potential and a lot of other things. I mean, snack food company logos have simplified, as well as restaurants logos have simplified. You have Game of Life 2 and whatnot, but I don't want to get off track here too much. So, for King Kong 1976, having a great potential, it certainly proved to be well successful in the box office alongside Jaws, which itself was an amazing movie. But with King Kong, it didn't necessarily amount to very much in comparison because it was released only a year afterwards. But I still do have the feeling that one of these days, many will look up to this film as being a pretty well-made film by Dino De Laurentiis, by Paramount, by Rick Baker, and by the likes of Jeff Bridges and everybody else involved. So, nearly 50 years after its release, we've had a great run. But with all the new Kong material, there's certainly a lot more that I could talk about relating to Kong. And so, be that as it may, a good 8.4 out of 10.1 is what I give this film. Certainly it was some of the best stuff that we could have ever seen in a Kong film, even by today's standards, when so many new Kong films have come out alongside so many new Godzilla films and other such stuff. So, I will see you guys again on Monday, hopefully with something new in mind. Maybe I could focus on another trilogy. Maybe I could probably focus on something different entirely. Who knows? But in any case though, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.
Whatever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.